June 6, 1944. Normandy, in the darkness above France. American paratroopers brace themselves as the red interior lights of the C-47 flicker across their faces. They are minutes away from the most dangerous jump of World War II, but look closely strapped. To their legs isn't the famous Thompson. It isn't a polished, expensive American masterpiece. It's an $18 hunk of stamped steel that most of them have already cursed at. A weapon built by a car parts factory. A gun so ugly soldiers laughed when they first saw it. But here's the twist. This cheap little thing is about to become the most durable American submachine gun ever made. It was never meant to last. It was never meant to be loved. It was supposed to be disposable, yet it would go on to fight in more wars across more decades than almost any weapon the United States ever produced. From Normandy to Korea, from Vietnam to the deserts of the Persian Gulf, when American troops needed a weapon that simply would not quit. The $18 M3 grease gun kept showing up. This is the story of how a weapon America expected to throw away outperformed the expensive icons, outlasted the legendary classics, can prove that in real combat, reliability beats beauty every single time. You're about to hear why U.S. soldiers who once mocked it eventually swore by it. If you want more true American war stories and forgotten battlefield legends, stay with me and tell me in the comments, what country are you watching from? Bye. 1941. The United States faced a brutal reality. A global war on two fronts demanded weapons that could be built fast, cheap, and in massive numbers. Thompson's submachine gun was loved by every soldier who held it, but it was simply too expensive, too slow to produce. Each one required nearly 150 hours of skilled machining, and even after simplification, a single Thompson still cost more than $40 at a time when America needed hundreds of thousands. War doesn't wait for perfection, and the Army Ordnance Department knew it. They needed something drastically cheaper, something any factory could build, even a factory that had never made a weapon before. So they looked at the rest of the world. Germany had the MP40 stamped steel, simple, efficient. Britain, fighting for survival during the Blitz, created the Sten, a crude but functional weapon stamped out for nearly nothing. The message was clear. In industrial warfare, speed and simplicity. Win battles? Enter George Hyde and Frederick Sampson of General Motors. Their assignment was almost absurd. Design a .45 caliber submachine gun faster. It's cheaper and simpler than anything America had ever built. A weapon so inexpensive, it wouldn't even be worth repairing. What came out of GM's Guidelamp division, a plant known for making car headlights, was unlike anything the Army expected. Pieces of stamped steel welded together formed the body. Only a handful of parts required machining. The entire weapon had just 23 parts. Production time and costs plummeted. When the Army saw the final number, just $18.50 per unit, they couldn't believe it. America suddenly had the disposable weapon it thought it wanted. But none of them knew that this ugly little gun was about to become one of the longest-serving firearms in U.S. military history. The first real test of the M3 grease gun wasn't in a factory or on a firing range. It came in the chaos of Normandy. As American paratroopers hit the ground in the pitch-black night of June 6, 1944. The M3 was supposed to give them fast, compact firepower, but almost immediately, frustration spread across the ranks. The gun looked crude, like something welded together in a garage, compared to the handsome, battle-proven Thompson. The M3 felt like an insult, especially to elite units like the 101st and 82nd Airborne. The complaints came fast. Troopers called it cheap, flimsy, and a piece of junk. Many refused to turn in their Thompsons, holding on to them like badges of honor. And honestly, in those early days, they had reasons to be angry. The M3's side-mounted cocking handle was a fragile strip of bent sheet metal. Dropped the gun on its right side, and the handle snapped clean off, instantly turning the weapon into a useless hunk of steel. In the fields of Normandy, armorers were overwhelmed with broken grease guns piling up at their feet, and the magazine didn't help its reputation. The M3 used a single-column 30-round magazine that was notoriously hard to load and unbelievably sensitive to dirt. A single grain of sand could jam it. Soldiers hammered the magazine catch tighter with ball-peen hammers just to stop mags from falling out on patrol. Others cut springs from M1 rifle operating rods to reinforce them. Day 1 with the grease. Gun wasn't pretty, but something happened as the fighting rolled deeper into France. The longer the war went on, the more the M3 began to show sides of itself no one expected. Yes, the Thompson was gorgeous. Yes, it felt powerful in the hand. But the M3 had something far more important in prolonged combat. Consistency. It worked every single time. By late 1944, feedback from frontline commanders quietly shifted. Patrol leaders wrote that the M3 was the best weapon for close-range ambushes and night operations. It was lighter, nearly 5 pounds lighter than the Thompson, and that mattered when you were crawling through mud, climbing hedgerows, or sprinting under machine gun fire. Its slower rate of fire, around 300 to 400 rounds per minute, gave soldiers more control and far more ammunition endurance in firefights. Reports started stacking up. The M3 wasn't jamming in mud. It wasn't choking in sand. It wasn't freezing in snow. Soldiers dragging it through muck found it still fired without cleaning. Its fully enclosed bolt kept out dirt. Its loose tolerances made it run even when filthy. In fact, in controlled tests, the M3 outperformed every American. It's a machine gun, including the Thompson in mud and sand reliability. Tank crews took notice fast. Inside cramped Shermans, space mattered more than looks. Our full-size Thompson simply got in the way. But an M3. It's compact, short, easy to maneuver, and perfect for blasting out of a turret hatch when Germans tried to swarm a vehicle out of winter. Of 44 tank battalions across Europe were stacking grease guns inside every vehicle they could get their hands on. In some units, 5 per tank became standard, and U.S. infantrymen, the same ones who mocked it at first sight, slowly began admitting a quiet truth. The M3 was ugly, but it wasn't weak. It wasn't fragile. It could be dropped, soaked, buried, dragged through snow, and still fire the moment a soldier needed it. The grease gun wasn't winning any beauty contests, but it was winning something far more important. It was earning trust. The fog lifted, just enough for the battlefield to reveal its true shape: an iron maze of German fortresses, trench networks, bunkers wired with overlapping fields of fire. And right at the center of it all was Patton's solution, the one the Army High Command initially doubted, not about to prove itself under the most brutal conditions. The European front had seen since Normandy. The order crackled through the field radios: execute the hammer and brake strategy. All units move. Patton didn't blink. This was the moment he had been engineering while everyone else argued over maps. Instead of smashing head-on into Metz like a textbook general, Patton turned the entire battlefield sideways. His armored divisions didn't charge the strongest points. He forced the Germans to expose their weaknesses by moving faster than their fortified doctrine could react. He didn't fight the terrain. He weaponized it. The 90th Infantry Division swept in first, not to attack the forts, but to cut the German lifelines, slicing their supply routes with precision that shocked even the German commanders. The audience watching in 2025 should remember this moment. Troops weren't just fighting an army. They were dismantling a fortress system. It's designed to be mathematically unbeatable. Then came the armored thrust. Sherman tanks roared through open ground. The Germans considered impassable. Patton's commanders hesitated for a heartbeat. This terrain wasn't in any manual. But the moment those tracks bit into the earth, they realized the genius of the plan. The Germans had built their defenses expecting a predictable U.S. attack. Patton forced them to fight in the one environment they hadn't prepared for. German officers panicked, sending urgent radio transmissions demanding reinforcements for forts that had never been threatened before. The entire Metz defense line began bending, twisting, shifting under pressure they couldn't calculate. Patton's voice in field reports was ice cold and electric. "We're not here to wrestle with their forts. We're here to make them abandon them." And that's exactly what happened. While U.S. infantry pinned German forces in place, American artillery unleashed a storm that ripped open the seams of the enemy's defense grid. This wasn't random shelling Patton coordinated fire. Missions using fast reconnaissance reports, adjusting fire every few minutes so the Germans could never reposition or recover. A fortress built to withstand static bombardment couldn't survive dynamic American artillery guided by real-time battlefield intelligence by noon. The Germans realized they were no longer defending Metz, they were trying to escape it. One German commander wrote in his after-action account that the American general seemed to strike everywhere at once. That wasn't an illusion. It was Patton's design from the beginning. Overwhelm the enemy not with template maneuvers, but with relentless operational tempo. No fortress system could mathematically counter U.S. engineers' bridged rivers the Germans thought were perfect, natural barriers. Armored columns appeared where German spotters swore nothing could move. Infantry units bypassed strongpoints the Germans believed would stall the Americans for weeks. And the key moment? The turning point. The instant Metz stopped being a German fortress and became a German liability. The capture of Fort Dryans. Outer support zones without a full assault. Patton hadn't broken the fort. He broke the reason for the fort to exist, when U.S. troops severed the communication arteries around Metz. The German garrison realized they weren't holding a defensive masterpiece. They were sitting inside a stone coffin. Patton's gamble worked. His strategy outpaced German math. His troops outmaneuvered German doctrine. And in a single sweeping stroke, the U.S. Army forced one of the most fortified cities in Europe to collapse not by slamming against its walls, but by making those walls irrelevant. This was the moment the entire high command understood. Patton wasn't just ready for Metz. He was the only general who could have cracked it, just when it looked like Patton had pulled off the impossible shattering. Metz's defensive rhythm and forcing the Germans into a chaotic retreat fate through a twist so sharp it could have broken any ordinary commander. But Patton wasn't ordinary. And this is the moment your viewers will lean in closer because things were about to get even more intense than before. With the German defense grid collapsing, you'd expect the U.S. Army to surge forward unopposed. But Metz wasn't done fighting. No, the German high command refused to let one of their oldest fortress cities fall without unleashing one last, desperate counterstroke. This time, they weren't sending poorly coordinated forces. They were sending hardened veterans who had sworn to fight, till the stone walls around them literally crumbled. And at that very moment, when the Americans had momentum, when victory seemed within reach, the skies over Metz unleashed a brutal winter storm. Snow-hammered visibility. Winds turned the battlefield into a whiteout nightmare. Gun barrels jammed. Radios crackled with static. The terrain Patton had used as a weapon suddenly transformed into an enemy. For any other general, this would have. It's been a nightmare. It's for Patton. It was fuel. This storm wasn't an obstacle. It was an opportunity. But the Germans saw the storm to end. They used it. Concealed by the blizzard, elite German units launched a sudden counterattack aimed straight at the U.S. infantry lines. Their goal was simple but devastating. Break the American advance. Restore the defensive perimeter. And trap entire U.S. battalions against river crossings that were now icing over. Patton's men were suddenly hit with a realization. The battle that felt nearly won wasn't. The enemy still had fight. The weather was turning, and the fortress city had one last card to play. This is where the tension spikes for your audience. Just imagine the scene. American soldiers crouched in freezing trenches, snow piling up on helmets, machine guns, struggling to cycle in the cold. German forces using the whiteout as cover, firing from angles barely visible through the storm. Tanks losing traction on icy ground. The entire front line shivering, exhausted, and under attack from a foe who refused to stay beaten in those critical minutes. Patton made the decision that would define everything that followed. He didn't pull back, didn't wait for the skies to clear. He ordered a full adaptation maneuver fight through the storm, matched the Germans in aggression, and turned their last counterattack into the moment that broke them completely. This rehook must keep viewers locked in, because the next move, Patton made, would become one of the most iconic tactical responses of the entire European campaign. He repositioned artillery using blind fire calculations. He pushed armored units through terrain no tank commander wanted to touch. He directed infantry to seal pockets in conditions so harsh it was a miracle rifles even fired. And he did it all while German commanders believed the weather would cripple the American assault. Instead, it only made the Americans fight harder. This wasn't just a battle for Metz. Anymore, this was a battle of wills, a fortress city designed for centuries of warfare against an army that refused to accept anything but forward momentum. A German force clawing for survival against a U.S. general who transformed every setback into a tactical advantage, and now the viewers understand. The fall of Metz wasn't guaranteed, the Germans weren't finished, and Patton was about to unleash a level of operational brilliance that no storm and no enemy could stop. Because the next moment, the moment you're about to hear, is when the battle for Metz stopped being a siege and became a showdown that would rewrite how warfare against fortified cities was fought. The storm may have tried to choke the momentum of the American assault, but Patton refused to let Nietzsche or the German High Command decide the fate of Metz. As the blizzard thickened, its officers huddled over maps that were barely visible under lantern light, a breath fogging the air inside makeshift command. Tense, yet the orders that Patton issued cut through the chaos with the same clarity he'd shown since the campaign began. While the Germans believed the weather had finally handed them the advantage, Patton turned the storm into a psychological weapon. The enemy assumed the Americans would slow down. Instead, Patton told his men to push even harder. Infantry units rotated positions rapidly to keep rifles warm enough to fire. Tank crews wrapped breech blocks with heated blankets, which engineers built. Improvised ice-clearing teams to keep armored routes open. For the U.S. forces, survival wasn't the mission, momentum was. And slowly, the storm began to work against the Germans instead of for them. Their supply lines froze. Their ammunition wagons bogged down in drifts. Their forward observers lost all visibility. And the very same blizzard they hoped would shield their counterattack now trapped them inside pockets they couldn't escape. This is where the impact hits hardest for your viewers. Patton didn't just beat the storm, he used it to break the entire German defensive system. American artillery batteries, guided by sound ranging instead of sight, unleashed devastating fire that fell with astonishing precision. Each barrage shattered German attempts to regroup. The famous fortresses of Metz, once symbols of unbreakable power, were now being reduced to smoking ruins under relentless American pressure. The U.S. infantry surged forward in staggered formations, closing gaps and surrounding German strongpoints one by one. Sherman tanks rolled through terrain the enemy considered impossible to cross, smashing through frozen mud and drifting snow. Lieutenant after lieutenant reported the same thing. We expected resistance. What we saw was collapse. Inside Metz itself, German officers faced reality. Their once proud positions were isolated. Communications were failing. Ammunition dwindled. Patton's forces were tightening a noose that left no hope for reinforcement. Local commanders sent desperate messages to higher headquarters, messages that went unanswered. For the Americans, this wasn't just a tactical victory. It was proof of something bigger. Patton's men had pushed through weather, fortifications, and veteran German units, not by luck, but by absolute refusal to stop. The impact rippled outward across the European theater. If Patton could break Metz, he could break anything standing between the U.S., its army, and Germany's heartland. By late November 1944, surrender flags began appearing above Metz's battlements. One by one, strongpoints fell. American troops entered the city with weapons ready, expecting traps or last stands, but what they found were exhausted German soldiers who had reached their breaking point. The resolution was clear. Metz had fallen. The myth of the fortress city had shattered. And the German command now faced a realization they never wanted to admit. Patton had turned what they believed was an impenetrable line into a stepping stone for the U.S. Army. The fall of Metz wasn't just strategic, it was symbolic. It proved that training, discipline, mobility, and leadership could overcome even the most legendary defenses. It proved that the American soldier, frozen, soaked, exhausted, but relentless, could take on a fortified city, built for medieval warfare, and crush it with mid-20th century speed and precision. And most importantly, set the stage for what was coming next. Because while Metz was falling, another storm was gathering far to the north. A storm that would become one of the most desperate and iconic battles in American history. A storm that would test everything Patton had left to give. This Victory was not the end. It was the turning point before the greatest challenge of the winter. Winter 1944 was arriving like a steel hammer across Europe. With it came a threat that would push even the most seasoned American soldiers to the brink. While Patton's forces celebrated the fall of Metz, the Allies faced a sudden shock. The Germans were launching a massive counteroffensive through the Ardennes. History would call it the Battle of the Bulge. For Patton, it was a test unlike any before battle where speed, decisiveness, and sheer audacity would determine the survival of entire divisions. The initial reports from the front were harrowing. Snow and fog limited visibility to a few yards. German panzer divisions struck like shadows in the night, smashing through weak points in the thinly spread American lines. Supply depots were captured or destroyed. Entire towns were at risk of falling. Communications faltered, morale wavered, and commanders struggled to understand the scale of the assault. The American High Command knew that failure here could prolong the war by months, possibly cost thousands of lives, and shake Allied momentum to its core. Patton's response was swift and unmistakable. He had anticipated the possibility of a German counterattack. But the scale of the Ardennes offensive demanded absolute precision. Without hesitation, he orchestrated a maneuver that would become legendary. A rapid 90-degree pivot of his Third Army toward the northern front. Tanks, artillery, and infantry units that had just fought in Metz now raced through icy roads, often under relentless German air attacks. Two reinforced beleaguered units trapped in the snow-covered forests. The U.S. forces on the front line were exhausted, but the sight of Patton's tanks thundering down the frozen roads ignited a renewed sense of hope. Infantrymen who'd been encircled or cut off now had armor and firepower closing in, ready to drive the Germans back. Artillery units coordinated fire strikes to halt enemy armor, while reconnaissance units guided tank columns along treacherous roads, avoiding ambushes and mines. Every move was calculated, precise, and executed under conditions that would have paralyzed any ordinary commander as the German advance continued. The situation grew desperate. Villages were burning, civilians were fleeing, and American units were forced into brutal defensive engagements. Patton's troops, however, were relentless. They struck where the enemy least expected, cutting off supply lines, encircling units, and forcing the Germans into chaotic retreats. Snow-caked roads became highways of firepower, and what had started as a terrifying counteroffensive now began to collapse under the weight of disciplined, aggressive American tactics. Every soldier understood the stakes. Every Sherman tank that roared down the icy roads carried more than armor and steel. It carried the lives of thousands and the reputation of the U.S. Army. Every paratrooper, every rifleman, and every artillery crew became part of a larger, unstoppable force. By mid-December, the Germans were being pushed back. The tide of the Ardennes would forever cement Patton's status as the only general prepared for such a crisis. The Battle of the Bulge was not only a triumph of tactics and courage, it was proof of the American ability to adapt, improvise, and dominate even under the harshest conditions. Patton's audacity and foresight turned what could have been disaster into a story of resilience, determination, and unmatched military brilliance. The enemy's last chance had been broken, and the U.S. Army stood stronger than ever, ready for the final push into Germany itself, just when it seemed the Battle of the Bulge had reached its peak. A new layer of tension gripped the American forces. The snow-covered Ardennes forests were still alive with danger. German forces, though battered, were not finished. They had shifted tactics, now relying on desperate counterattacks, ambushes, and hidden artillery. Every mile of road, every ridge, every frozen village was a potential trap. For Patton's men, the fight wasn't over. In fact, it was about to become even more brutal and decisive. Reinforcements were arriving in stages, and timing was critical. Patton's armored units were racing against the clock, dodging wrecked vehicles, felled trees, and frozen rivers. Infantrymen carried their weapons and supplies through knee-deep snow, facing frostbite and exhaustion at every step. And yet, morale remained high because every soldier knew the stakes. Hold the line, push back the Germans, and save thousands of lives that would otherwise have been lost to encirclement or starvation. The Germans, meanwhile, were scrambling. Panzer divisions that had penetrated deep into the Allied lines found themselves cut off, their fuel supplies dwindling, and radio communications failing. Patton exploited every weakness. His commanders coordinated artillery barrages with precision, striking enemy strong points and forcing withdrawals without the need for costly frontal assaults. Tank columns punched through narrow passes, flanking positions that the enemy thought secure. For the soldiers on the ground, it was a test of endurance and ingenuity. Patrols moved silently between snowbanks. Infantry squads reinforced positions in complete whiteout conditions, and every action counted. Troops improvised constantly, using terrain, weather, and sheer audacity to turn what seemed like desperation into opportunity. Each small victory had an amplified effect, undermining German confidence and forcing them to react instead of act. And here's the key moment that makes this rehook grip viewers. The momentum began shifting in a way no one had predicted. Germans, once confident in their advance, now faced a relentless American push that ignored the winter, the terrain, and their previous tactical advantage. Patton's audacity and the soldiers' discipline created a domino effect. Every countermeasure by the enemy only played into the hands of the U.S. Army. This is the moment viewers will lean in closer. The battle isn't over. The enemy isn't defeated, but the Americans, exhausted, outnumbered, and battered, are turning chaos into control. Every movement, every engagement, every tactical decision is driving the Germans toward collapse. Patton's forces were proving that even the harshest conditions could be overcome. That leadership, strategy, and relentless execution could bend the battlefield to American will. And in a few hours, that relentless pressure would force the enemy into decisions that would seal their fate and set the stage for the final push into Germany. The story isn't finished, and your viewers need to see what happens next. The resilience, the strategy, the unbreakable spirit of U.S. forces are about to deliver the ultimate resolution as the snow began to melt and the frozen roads cleared. The full scale of Patton's victory in the Ardennes became clear. German advance had been halted, their forces shattered, and their plans for a decisive winter offensive utterly ruined. The Americans, battered but unbroken, had turned what looked like a near catastrophe into one of the most remarkable recoveries in military history. Patton's audacity and speed had done more than repel the Germans. They had rewritten the rules of battlefield initiative. Armored divisions that had raced hundreds of miles in freezing conditions now linked up with infantry units who had held the line under constant attack. Communication lines, once disrupted, were restored with ingenuity and efficiency, ensuring that artillery, armor, and infantry operated as a single, unstoppable force. Every soldier played a role, and every role contributed to the final victory. The Germans, now in full retreat, realized the impossible. The Americans could fight, adapt, and recover faster than any offensive they could launch. Small unit reports described how Sherman tanks maneuvered through icy forests, cutting off escape routes, while infantry patrols secured towns and villages without direct engagement. Supply shortages and poor weather had failed to stop the Americans. In fact, the adversity sharpened their effectiveness. For the American soldiers, the impact was as psychological as it was strategic. They had survived the surprise German attack, repelled elite panzer divisions, and proven that determination, discipline, and leadership could overcome even the most daunting odds. Letters home from soldiers spoke of exhaustion, yes, but also pride of being part of a force that refused to break when tested. Veterans would later say that the Ardennes campaign taught them that courage under fire, combined with quick thinking and trust in leadership, was what made the U.S. Army unbeatable. This resolution extended beyond the immediate battle. The failure of the German offensive accelerated the collapse of Nazi defensive plans in the West. It allowed the Allies to regain momentum, pushing through Belgium, the Netherlands, and eventually into Germany itself. Patton's Third Army, tested in snow, mud, and chaos, became a model of rapid operational maneuver that would influence us, its military doctrine, for decades. The Battle of the Bulge and the fall of Metz before it demonstrated a key lesson. American soldiers, equipped with the right leadership and determination, could turn even the most dire situations into decisive victories. The combination of speed, coordination, and bold tactical choices ensured that the U.S. forces not only survived, but thrived, ultimately shortening the war and saving countless lives. For your viewers, this is the payoff, the story of relentless courage, leadership under pressure, and American ingenuity in the face of impossible odds. The impact is undeniable, the lessons enduring, and the legacy of these victories permanent. The aftermath of Patton's lightning maneuvers and the crushing of the German Ardennes offensive rippled far beyond the battlefield. Entire divisions of German troops were captured, while countless others were forced into chaotic retreats, leaving equipment, weapons, and supplies behind. The collapse of their winter offensive weakened Nazi defenses along the Western Front and emboldened Allied forces for the final push into Germany. Patton's audacity had not only saved thousands of American lives, but had also accelerated the downfall of a faltering enemy across the U.S. Army. The lessons from Metz and the Ardennes were dissected, studied, and integrated into doctrine. Commanders at every level took note of how speed, flexibility, and initiative could overcome even the most fortified positions. Small unit tactics that emphasized adaptation and improvisation became standard training. Patton's methods inspired an entire generation of soldiers and officers who would carry those lessons into future conflicts. From Korea to Vietnam, but the fallout wasn't limited to strategy and doctrine. Morale soared among American troops and the general public. News of Patton's victories spread like wildfire, bolstering confidence that the U.S. Army could outthink, outmaneuver, and outperform any enemy in the field. Soldiers who had once doubted the harsh winter, the terrain, or their own leadership found renewed faith in their capabilities and in the people commanding them. Meanwhile, the German High Command faced the grim truth. Their most ambitious winter offensive had failed catastrophically. Elite panzer divisions were decimated, logistical networks destroyed, and morale irreparably damaged. The Ardennes offensive had been intended to split the Allied forces and turn the tide, but it instead hastened Germany's retreat. Patton's audacity had turned an enemy advantage winter terrain surprise into a vulnerability they could not recover from. The civilian population in liberated regions also felt the impact. Towns and villages that had been under threat of German occupation now witnessed American forces bringing order, security, and a return to normalcy. Roads were cleared, food and medical supplies distributed, and communication restored. For countless European civilians, a combination of Patton's leadership and the courage of American soldiers brought hope and tangible relief. By the time spring of 1945 arrived, Patton's campaigns in Europe had left an indelible mark. The U.S. Army emerged stronger, smarter, and more confident than ever, ready to push into Germany and bring the war to its conclusion. The fallout of these battles, Metz, the Ardennes, and the relentless pursuit of victory solidified Patton's legacy and demonstrated the unparalleled effectiveness of the American military machine when guided by bold leadership, innovative tactics, and unyielding determination. For viewers, this is the lasting lesson. Victory is never accidental. It comes from vision, courage, and relentless action. Patton and his men didn't just fight battles, they reshaped the course of the war, proving the unstoppable force of American ingenuity, discipline, and fighting spirit. As the guns fell silent across Europe and the smoke cleared, the legacy of Patton's campaigns was undeniable. Metz had been taken, the Ardennes counteroffensive crushed, and the road into Germany lay open. American soldiers, from the infantry in snow-covered forests to tank crews navigating icy roads, had proven that courage, discipline, and audacity could overcome even the most daunting challenges. Patton had not just commanded troops, he had inspired them to achieve the impossible. The lessons of these battles would echo for generations. Commanders studied his rapid maneuvers, his use of terrain and weather as tactical tools, and his ability to adapt in real time. Soldiers who survived these campaigns carried with them stories of resilience, innovation, and the unbreakable spirit of the American Army. These weren't just victories on the map, they were victories of leadership, strategy, and human determination. 4. The World Patton became a symbol of unstoppable American force. Cities liberated, enemy strongholds crushed, and entire enemy units rooted, all under the leadership of a man who understood that, in war, hesitation was the enemy. His campaigns reminded everyone that success comes not from waiting for perfection, but from bold action, relentless pressure, and the courage to act decisively when the moment demands it. And for viewers today, the story is clear. The fall of Metz, the crushing of the German Ardennes offensive, and the unyielding drive of Patton's Third Army illustrate the power of American strategy and leadership. They show that even in the darkest, most impossible situations, the right combination of courage, planning, and determination can turn the tide. Patton's victories weren't just about winning battles. They were about proving that the American soldier, guided by audacious leadership, could face any challenge, defy all odds, and shape the course of history. His campaigns remain a blueprint for triumph, a testament to relentless drive, and a legacy that still inspires courage and excellence in the U.S. military today. The story of Patton and the American Army is proof that greatness in war doesn't come from luck. It comes from vision, courage, and the unwavering determination to win.